What's up everybody, it's Izzy from PowerliftingToWin, and as a lot of you guys already know, I am an advocate of the sumo deadlift. I believe that everybody should give it a shot regardless of how you're built and what the charts say about your anthropometry. Now, one of the consequences of me recommending deadlifting sumo all the time is a lot of people also have asked me about the modified sumo stance or the semi-sumo stance. And those of you who are not familiar, basically Ed Coan is the one who I think is responsible for popularizing this technique. And a semi-sumo stance is just a really narrow sumo stance. It's basically you have your hands inside of your legs, but your legs are just outside of your hands, rather than say like a full true sumo stance where your feet are out near the plates. Now, if you also don't know about Ed Coan, he's probably the greatest deadlifter of all time. It just depends on how you look at things. He deadlifted 901 at 220 raw. So this really invites the question of, why would Ed Coan use a semi-sumo stance instead of a full sumo stance or perhaps even a regular conventional stance? And it's a simple answer. The reason why he did that is because that's the technique that he lifted the most weight with. Now, the more interesting question for those of us who are kind of like powerlifting nerds is, why would somebody lift more weight with a semi-sumo stance? And that is the topic that I want to cover in this video. So let's get to it. In the YouTube community, a lot of people hate on sumo deadlifts. They think they're basically cheater deadlifts or like pussy deadlifts or something. I don't know. People are really unreasonable about it. But let's think about why a powerlifter might want to do a sumo deadlift. I'm going to give you guys the brief version. So a sumo deadlift obviously cuts down on the range of motion. But it really isn't that simple. There's a lot of other things that are going on with the sumo deadlift in terms of biomechanics. So when you take a sumo stance, one of the things that you're doing is you're artificially making your thigh segment shorter in relation to the bar. And basically what that means is that your hips are going to be closer to the bar, which is going to improve your leverage in the starting position in terms of hip extension. Now, the other thing that a lot of people don't consider about the sumo deadlift when they start spouting off about how it's so much easier than the conventional deadlift is that by taking this wider stance, you're also going to turn the movement into something that's more akin to a squat. And I'm not saying that a sumo deadlift is a squat, but what it does is it closes down the knee angle in the starting position while opening up the hip angle. Now, this is pretty significant because think of it like this. Can you quarter squat or half squat more weight? Obviously, everybody can quarter squat more weight, right? Well, that's the trade that you get with a sumo deadlift. In exchange for that shorter range of motion, in exchange for getting your hips closer to the bar, in exchange for having a more open hip angle, what you get is a more closed knee angle, and it's harder to break the bar off of the floor. And this is why the sumo deadlift is traditionally known as hard off the floor and easy at lockout. Now, on the other hand, a lot of you are probably familiar with the saying that, the conventional deadlift is really exactly the opposite. And that is that it's easier off the floor and harder at lockout. However, the primary reason that this is the case, in my opinion and by my analysis, is because most people who conventional deadlift will round their backs at very heavy weights. And let's think about what happens biomechanically when you round your back. When you round your back, it artificially shortens the torso segment of the deadlift. It depresses your shoulders forward, thus increasing the length of your arms, so in a way, in the starting position. And by doing this, it's going to open the knee angle and open the hip angle and bring your hips closer to the bar. So rounding your back literally improves everything about your leverage and your mechanical efficiency in the starting position. And the reason why the conventional deadlift is even stronger with a round back than a round back sumo is because with a closer stance, you're going to have that more open knee angle in the first place, right? You're going to have a more closed hip angle, but the knee angle is going to be more open. And so literally the most efficient position you can have in a deadlift in the starting position is going to be the round back conventional deadlift. And so what this really sets up for us is a spectrum, right? And on the one hand, we have the wide stance, flat back sumo deadlift, which is going to be the absolute hardest technique to use to break weights off of the ground, but it's going to give you the absolute best leverage for locking weights out because of the shorter range of motion and the more open hip angle in the starting position. On the other hand, the conventional deadlift is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where it's going to give you the most power and speed off of the floor if you round your back, but it's going to get harder at lockout. Literally everything else falls somewhere in between this spectrum. So if you have a flat back conventional deadlift, that's going to be closer to the flat back sumo wide stance, right? It's going to still be a conventional deadlift, but you're going down the spectrum. Now let's say you have a flat back semi-sumo deadlift. Now you're even further down the spectrum, right? And this is where we can start to begin our discussion of why somebody might use a semi-sumo deadlift. So let's think about what Ed Coan is really doing with his semi-sumo stance. It's actually more of a conventional deadlift than it is a sumo deadlift. And let's think about this in terms of this spectrum, right? When Ed Coan was using this stance, he was rounding his back heavily, and it was a very narrow stance. So in fact, what he's doing has way more in common with a conventional deadlift than a sumo deadlift. And that's even why for Ed, he had a lot of power off of the ground, but when he missed weights, it would be halfway up or near lockout, just like many conventional pullers. Because the problem is when you round your back, you get that great starting efficiency, but eventually you're gonna have to finish the entire pull with just your lower back because your hips have already extended and your knees have already extended. Whereas with a flat back sumo pull, for example, when you extend your knees and your hips, the movement is done because all the work is complete. On the other hand, if you extend your knees and your hips with a round back, you still have to like uncurl your back to finish the movement, right? So that's where you get the round back helping at the starting position but hurting at the lockout. So really, again, all Ed Coan is doing here is he's picking something that's in between the two extremes. Extreme number one, flat back sumo, wide stance. Extreme number two, round back conventional, narrow stance. So this really, invites the question for all of you guys out there is like, how do you know if semi-sumo is going to be the stance that works for you? You know what, guys? There's all these charts out there that tell you like limb length proportions, and you're supposed to calculate it to get an idea of what you might be better at. The reality is you just have to try it. And if you're going to try semi-sumo, keep in mind that for most people, it's going to be more like a conventional deadlift. So you don't need to worry about getting your hips super low. You don't need to worry about being completely vertical with your back. It's actually more of a conventional pull in the first place. Now, all this said, just to give you guys a clue as to who might be the most likely to benefit from this stance, I've personally noticed that the people who like to use this stance are long-limbed lifters who have legs that are actually longer than their arms. So they have both long arms and long legs, but just proportionally, their legs are even longer than their arms. And this allows them to basically do a reasonable conventional deadlift, as would be the case for people with more normal proportions, and still take advantage of their long arms, still take advantage of the efficient starting position. So if you're one of those people who has a poor bench and a relatively good deadlift compared to it, and you're also somebody who benefits from a wide squat stance, maybe you should consider giving the semi-sumo deadlift a shot. It could work out for you, maybe not, but always, of course, the best thing to do is just to try and see for yourself. So I hope that clears up any questions you guys had about the semi-sumo deadlift. If there's something I forgot or if there's something that's confusing, go ahead and leave a comment and I'll do my best to answer that. And as always, my friends, don't forget to check out PowerliftingToWin.com for more great powerlifting information. And have a nice day.